So, Lisa, for people who aren't familiar with you or Mom Sprouting Seeds, can you talk a little bit about the company and the history of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a family owned and run business. It started on my parents' farm in 1982. So they have a long history with organic agriculture. They've been farming organically on their small mixed farm since 1974. So there were a number of years where everything that they consumed was produced on the farm. They had leaf cutter bees and cows and chickens and a large garden. But crop production and seed production was always part of that. And in the early 80s, they transitioned away from sheep farming and into alfalfa seed production. And they found that they had made a few connections with commercial sprout growers who really liked the quality of their alfalfa seed. And so the business really grew organically from there. So we have a long history of selling seeds for sprouts and microgreens. And I've been involved in on the family, being a farm kid on the family farm for as long as I can remember. I did leave home for post-secondary education for a number of years. I was studying in Montreal. My partner and I lived there, and I was in a program that just wasn't a good fit for me. And at the same time, my parents were thinking about retirement and potentially exiting the business. So I came home to help them do that. And in the process, I realized that I really wanted to, stay connected to the family farm and be a part of the business. So I ended up starting a buyout of the business, and that was 9 years ago.
Yeah, how's the business evolved since you've taken it over? Have you more or less kept the same direction, or has it kind of transitioned a little bit more into the vision now that you have from then and now going forward?
Well, I probably spent at least the first 5 years when I came back to the farm, just learning as much as I could from mom and dad, because there are a lot of moving, a lot of moving pieces, both to this business, and my dad and I farmed together for 7 years. So there was also the seed production side of things where I had, despite having grown up on the farm, I had a lot to learn just about crop production and harvesting and agronomics and all of those pieces. So there were a lot of years that were just about learning and being a sponge. And since then we've been able to think about developing new strategic visions for the business. And I'm really fortunate that my mom is still a part of the business. So we get to do that strategic visioning together. And it's been really fun to tackle some of these bigger projects and see us grow together.
And when people think about seed suppliers, I think there's maybe two perceptions that they have of them. One is they just source seeds and resell them. They're resellers. And the other
Mm-hmm.
one is, they're growing the seeds that they produce. Where does Mums fit on that spectrum? Are you producing some of the seeds that you're selling, and are you retailing other seeds grown by just growers? What's the percentage breakdown there?
So when the business started in 82, everything that mom and dad sold was grown on their farm. And sometime in the 90s, the business started to outgrow the size of their farm. So we're on a relatively small farm for Saskatchewan standards. We're on about 500 acres, and half of it is still in old growth forest. So we've got only about 250 cultivatable acres. So that's quite small for the needs of the business today. And so even when my dad and I had most of those acres under cultivation over the last few years, we were only supplying, I think, about 2% of the seeds that we sold. So we just need a lot more acres than what our farm can provide. And then this would be the first year actually that we are not growing any of the seeds that we sell. So we've rented the land out to a neighboring organic farmer. My dad passed away last year, and I just couldn't manage both the seed production and the business without his help. So we'll be reassessing probably in 5 years, because I really do love farming and I love growing seed, but first and foremost, I need to make sure that our customers are taken care of and that I'm running this business well.
So you've made the shift from producing all seed to slowly now producing no seed. Funny to hear that 250 acres is a small farm in Saskatchewan when it would be a massive farm in southwestern BC. So one thing I'm curious about is, could you talk about the process of sourcing seeds for mums and what that's like in terms of getting appropriate certified organic seed for sprouting and microgreens?
Sure. I mean, it's what we do, and it's challenging and it's fun. I think right now we're working with about 100 farmers. Most of them are in Saskatchewan, but some are outside of the province or outside of the country. And we're lucky right now that our provincial organic association, Sask Organics, has been doing a lot of work to help farmers to transition to organic. So we've actually seen some new entrants over the last few years, which has been really nice. So the Sask Organics has been putting on agronomic workshops. So farmers who are conventional farmers and are maybe a little bit intimidated about the agronomic side of things, because organic farming can be so knowledge intensive, have these wonderful resources. They're able to go and chat with existing farmers and other farmers who are wanting to transition. So long story short, the base of producers in Saskatchewan is growing, as I think it is everywhere, which is really nice to see. So if we have a new farmer who wants to become a supplier, our very first step is always to run a very extensive quality analysis on a pre-purchase sample from that farmer. So they'll send us a representative sample of the seed that they've grown, and if it passes our quality analysis and meets all of our criteria, then we next need to make sure that they're following we have our own set of good agricultural practices that tie into our food safety program. And then of course, we also need to make sure that they're in good standing with their organic certification. So we do a lot of ongoing monitoring of our suppliers and an annual review, and but we're really lucky to be located where we are, because we have a lot of really good organic farmers close at hand.
And so that's great working with so many farmers. And Diego, just to update you, Lisa was saying they work with about 100 organic farmers, a lot in Saskatchewan. I know seed through Mums comes, some of the seed can come from all over the world. So what percentage of the seed are you able to provide from just those, the farmers you work with directly?
By volume, it's about 80% of our seed is grown in Saskatchewan. And then, seed that doesn't grow well in our climate, we're sourcing from outside of the province or the country. And we do have some really good long-standing relationships with a handful of organic seed suppliers to source some of the specialty crops that we can't source directly from farmers.
I have a question here, Chris. One of the things Chris and I were talking about yesterday was the quality of seed out there and where is it at. You're doing quality testing on seed that you're bringing in. How good is the average seed out there that you're buying? Do you find that most of the seed that you test is going to pass snuff, or is there a lot of rejecting happening? Is the seed industry on the production side just really good now and generally producing high quality seed? Or are you finding no, you really got to be careful because there are some bad seed suppliers out there?
It really varies. For me, I think more, it varies a bit with maybe the producer or supplier. It can vary a lot with the crop year too. So if we've had an unusual weather event, which happens more often than not, then that can be even more of a determinant than the caliber of a farmer's skills in the field. So really, climate change is having a big impact on our ability to source quality seed. But some seed types, we might pass 80% of the samples that we would test might pass. Those would be on the high end, and then other seed types, for instance, sunflower or fava beans, we would be rejecting closer to 80%. So there's a big variation too in terms of just what crop we're looking at.
What are the main reasons for rejecting that you see?
So for every seed type, we have a number of quality parameters that we would look at. So everything from, I mean, obviously germination and yield are big factors, but we're looking at appearance, we're looking at taste, we're looking at leaf, we're looking at mold in the seed bed, and it does vary from seed type to seed type, but.
So within that, like, is there a particular challenge that you come up with the most in sourcing these seeds? Like, is it germination? Is it the cleanliness of a lot? And is there anything particular to being certified organic and sourcing? You're obviously going to have a much more limited pool in terms of certified organic growers. So what would be like sort of the biggest challenge within that you're finding with any of the seeds you source?
And I mean, I don't know. I would have a really hard time speaking to the quality of organic seed compared to the quality of conventional seed, because I don't have any experience growing conventional seed. But just anecdotally, I'd like to think that in general we're working with a higher quality pool of producers, and that the quality is a bit higher in organics, but don't quote me on that. That's just my personal opinion. But then again, the challenge of working with much more limited supply, right? Like, depending on what area of the world we're talking about, it's typically we only see about 2% land in organic production. So just much smaller numbers. And we know that we could grow the business quite quickly if we were to expand into conventional seed, because we have a number of customers who would be happy to source that. But we're happy with where we're at, but it is challenging because there are some seed types that just certainly aren't available in the quantities that we need through organic production right now. So we just aren't able to offer a few varieties. So yeah, besides climate change and like the weather events and extreme wet, extreme drought, and all of those pieces that farmers are facing right now, which has a big impact on quality and also on yields. For the farmers too, selling to us is slightly more of a risk than selling into other markets, because we have to, of course, run a pathogen analysis, and we have our good agricultural practices that they have to adhere to. And so there's we do occasionally have to reject lots for a Listeria, E. coli, or Salmonella contamination, and then that can be really challenging for them to have a rejected lot, especially if it's a specialty seed crop that the only market is the microgreen market. And so that's a big challenge for us, because we want to get more farmers growing these specialty seeds, but then if it doesn't either meet our quality standards, or if it doesn't pass pathogen analysis, then it can be quite a significant loss for them.
Do you find that you're able to change the market through buying pull? They always say vote with your pocketbook, and obviously us as consumers, we can buy from a company like Mumm's and potentially influence what Mumm's buys if you see a bunch of sales coming in. On the wholesale end of things, some of these varieties are tougher to come by because you're looking for organic. They're not as popular. Are you guys big enough to start getting more farmers growing these to then essentially make them more popular?
Well, I'd like to think so. Like, we've introduced a few, like, not introduced, but for instance, what's a good example? Marrow fat peas for quite a few years were really popular, just like short 3-day sprout for us, but they're quite, like, the agronomics of them are quite challenging. So we had farmers with crop failures quite a few years in a row. And so then we thought that maybe we could get Oregon giant peas to a scale that they could substitute for marrow fat peas. And so it took us quite a while to get there, but now we have a few farmers who are growing Oregon giant peas, which is just like, they're just an heirloom garden seed variety. But that, so I think maybe that touches on what you're asking. And
sure.
And some of these, like, fava beans might be another example. They're really, in Saskatchewan, farmers are finding them to be a really good nitrogen fixer, and they want to put them in their rotation, but they don't necessarily have a market for them. And we did not have any consumer demand for fava beans at all, but we found that they just grew. If we can get the quality that we need, that they're growing quite a nice microgreen. So we did, I feel like we kind of developed or partially developed that market ourselves too. So that was nice to see happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in that regard, when I look at the line of seeds that Mumm's carries, it seems like it's a good selection. I wouldn't say the biggest selection out there, which bigger isn't always better. So it seems to me that the selection you offer represents the best seeds that you can get in terms of quality, certified organic, and probably what's going to grow best for the farmers. Like, would that be an accurate representation of what you're offering? It's the stuff you can offer the best of because of those limitations?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And also trying to keep in mind that we need to have ongoing supply to the best of our ability for our customers as well. So if we introduce like a new specialty seed and then we can't continue to supply it down the road, then that can really impact our commercial customers. So yeah.
How do you deal with this as a business? Because a lot of microgreen producers who might buy their seed from you, they face this challenge of, you know, maybe I should add another crop to the mix. Maybe I should do something else. Maybe my customers want more. I mean, do you feel pressured to do that as a company of, you know, maybe we don't have enough seeds listed in the catalog. Maybe we should get more. Should we expand? People are asking for this. How do you stay focused on this is what we can get well, and we're okay with it, and we're not going to expand just to add more just because we want to or we can if it's not the best? Because I think a lot of businesses do that and they get pressured to do that, and it can come back to haunt them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with you there. And we, like, our customer service team gets, you know, inundated with those requests probably every day. And we have like an extensive wish list that we call it of the seed types that we don't carry and the customers that have asked for them. And that, you know, that helps us a little bit too when we're sourcing seed, because we can see maybe if we have dozens and dozens of customers asking for a particular seed type, then maybe we need to look at it. And if we haven't had luck, you know, getting the quality we need, then maybe we just need to dig in a little bit deeper, or have different producers grow it, or, you know, take a different approach. But I tend to agree with you that it makes sense to try to stay focused on the key products that we know we can offer really well.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, Lisa, so we're talking specifically about microgreen seeds and sprouting seeds. Can you talk a little bit about what differentiates a microgreen seed or sprout seed from a regular vegetable seed?
Well, we obviously have food safety considerations that you wouldn't have with garden seed. So we do extensive pathogen testing on, you know, every lot of seed that comes in our door, and then we hold it until we get our third-party lab results back and release it. So that's one feature, is that, and then we also have a food safe, like a GFSI level food safety program in place. So we have a lot of you know, procedures and good manufacturing practices to make sure that once we've received the seed and have done our pathogen test, that we're not, you know, putting the seed at risk through our storage or processing or bagging, etc. So that is one piece that differentiates us. And then also we're looking obviously for early stage growth characteristics rather than the characteristics of the mature plant. So those are the key pieces, I think.
Right.
Yeah, one thing Chris and I were talking about the other day was selecting seeds more for microgreens and sprouts. If you're looking for these characteristics and you're dealing with the same farmers year after year, do you find that some of these crops, they can trend better towards microgreens over time, or they have trended more towards microgreens over time? Like, are farmers able to do any sort of selection on their end to encourage some of these traits that you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And on farm selection is a really important thing. And then also you know, especially if a farmer has been working with a variety over a number of years, they can also, you know, that variety does adapt to meet the needs of their particular farm. So varieties aren't necessarily as stable as we'd like to think, but that can be a good thing because the farmers can end up with a better quality seed over a number of years that suits their farm better.
It's an intriguing contrast because when you think about, I'm a farmer growing seed, I want to adapt the seed to my growing conditions, but there's also the seed they're selling to a microgreens grower, which also wants seed adapted to their conditions, which is one of the challenges with breeding, I think, in general.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious about, I've worked with mums for many years. I started buying sprouting seed about 20 years ago, and then shifted over more to microgreens. And I know a big thing for me was being able to call and talk to you or talk to someone else about the lots of seed, learn about what's in, what's coming. And I know when I get information, it's really helpful. And I often try to give information in return. What role does customer feedback play for you in maintaining and improving seed quality?
It's really critical for us because we have, you know, for any given seed type, we have customers that are growing it in dozens and dozens and dozens of different ways. And when we're doing our quality analysis, we're trying to replicate, you know, as many ways as we can, but we really need to know how the seed is being grown, but B, whether or not a particular lot is working well for folks. And even just when you look at the variable of like the different soils that are being used, they can have a tremendous impact. And so we, you know, have a few different ones on hand that we try to work with and make sure that we're getting good results in all of them. But there's just so many issues that can impact end results. So we find the conversations that we have with our customers invaluable, and we learn so much.
Yeah, no, it's been super valuable for us as growers to have that feedback, and often we're hearing like a seed is growing really good for us, but maybe not good for other growers, and vice versa. So it really gives a sense of how much the growing system can influence how well the seed does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how things have shifted? You know, when I think back 20 years, microgreens were still sprouts to me. They were just sprouts grown in soil. And now I think in the past about 10 years or so, we've really seen this rise, which comes in waves of microgreens popularity. Like, has this shift of small scale and mid scale and even larger scale microgreens companies, is that shifting, changing things for mums as a business in terms of how you operate?
Well, I mean, it really is, because our customer base has grown and changed, and even the customers that we've had for decades that are, you know, commercial sprout producers, most of them are now commercial sprout and microgreen producers. So it feels like that's everywhere. And you know, obviously in terms of the seed that we source and how we test it and analyze it, it has shifted the way that we look at things a fair bit. But you know, we've just kind of rolled with the changes. It seems to be kind of just a natural fit for us to have evolved into supplying seed for sprouts and microgreens.
Did you have another question there, Diego?
Yeah, you know, along those lines, I mean, how have things changed in the short term with everything that we've seen with COVID-19 happening? You know, the seed industry, I know just from seeing it down here in the States, was really shaken up. What has been your experience as a retailer living through this?
I think like all seed suppliers, we were hit really hard. For us, it was about 2.5 months of increased, like really wildly increased sales, as people started to focus more on food security and local food production and all of those pieces. So that was a big challenge for us. You know, and from talking to other like garden seed companies, you know, some were hit a lot harder than us even. And of course, we were in a really fortunate place where we didn't have to lay staff off, and we were actually able to support the community by bringing on more staff. So that was that was nice. But yeah, inventory and seed supply was definitely a challenge, and sales are back to a normal place, and we feel, we feel comfortable with seed supply right now.
Do you feel like that was a blip on the radar? I know nobody knows, but how do you treat this as a business? Do you anticipate this much demand again, say next winter, if something like this were to happen again? How do you plan for this when it is so unpredictable?
It's a good question. We are just starting to, to plan for our winter and do some some thinking and planning around a potential second wave, and what that could mean for our inventory and our supplies. So I think that's an important planning process for everyone to go through. And we also, even on the supply side of things, like just some of the sanitation products that we use and stuff, making sure that we have everything in place that we need. So I think that if we're able to plan for it, and it's not and we aren't blindsided by it the way that we were this spring, I see the outcomes being a bit better. And I also imagine that the world's reaction has shifted a little bit. But I do think that one of the silver linings of this awful pandemic has been that the world has focused some of its energy on food security and on local food production. And so that's, a much needed area that we needed to pay attention to. So it's been good to see.
When you go back to some of this seed buying that was happening in March, April, May timeframe, was there ever close to an actual shortage of seed, or was it more an order handling issue where there was just so many orders coming in? The problem was processing them. It wasn't the actual supply. Or was the supply ever really in the danger zone where the volume being bought was actually taking the supply to really low levels?
We had a number. It was both for us. I can't speak to other seed suppliers, so we didn't have the capacity, even with the extra staff and et cetera and extra shifts, we didn't have the capacity to keep up with the volume of orders, even if the seed supply had been there. But also we did run out of certain types of seed. But that wasn't, to me, it wasn't a worrying supply issue, because the supply was there. It was just a matter of the logistics of getting it in and getting it tested and getting our lab results back. And that all can take time. So we just weren't prepared for that.
Yeah, that's kind of good to hear, to know that seed is still there, even if it's not as easily accessible.
Yeah.
Are you looking at potentially reviewing, because I imagine contracts you have for next year's seed, that seed is planted in the ground already.
Yes.
Are you kind of looking at, wow, if these sales happen again, we're not going to have enough supply? Or do you feel pretty comfortable now that things, you saw a wave, things leveled out, that next year's supply is looking pretty good? Or are there concerns about future seed supply?
Well, we've done a few things. We've actually, we have more supply in some things than we normally would already. So we do have an excess of inventory in certain products, like some of the products that are more challenging, more specialty crops. And then for other crops that we just go through in huge volumes, so we just don't have the capacity to oversupply ourselves, then we're looking at making sure that we have a good network of secondary growers and suppliers should the need arise, and also pre-testing samples so that we've have the quality analysis done and we know which lots we'd like to bring in if the need arises.
So I've got just a few general questions that we talked about before. Mm-hmm. Diego, is there any follow-up questions you have on what we've talked about here?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that does keep coming up is pathogen testing. If people buy from you after hearing this, I think they can feel safe knowing that their seed has been tested. But are there some protocols that you would recommend that a buyer goes through if they're buying seed from a seed retailer? Are there common questions you should be asking or searching out for on a seed supplier's website? Pathogen testing, things like that. I mean, you're probably very familiar with the industry and you see the good side and the bad side of things. What should consumers be looking for when they're buying seeds, especially on a commercial scale?
Well, from a food safety perspective, the three key pieces would be to make sure that they've had, their pathogen tests. And you can actually, as a grower, you should be able to request the certificates of analysis and have them on file, depending on what your food safety program looks like. That's a good idea. It's possibly good to buy from a seed supplier that has a really robust food safety program in place. Like we had to go up from just a basic HACCP program to GFSI, and we feel really good about doing so. So those would be some key pieces in terms of looking for a supplier.
Well, we've seen with the rise in popularity of microgreens, a lot more seed suppliers pop up. Do you have a sense on how well other, and not to be incriminating, but do you have a sense of how well other seed companies are doing at keeping up that high standard of seed hygiene?
That's a good question. I really don't know. Like, if you want to be really, really confident in what your seed supplier is doing, then having a third party verified food safety audit is the very very best verification that you have that your seed supplier is doing the right things in terms of GMPs. But if they don't have that third party audit, then you can always ask them a series of questions about how they handle the seed and what good manufacturing practices they have in place, and what do they do around allergens, and what do they, how do they do their pathogen testing, and all of those pieces. So you can kind of do a little mini audit yourself if you feel comfortable doing that. And then another piece I think that's important, and I know that all the reputable seed suppliers that we're connected with do this, is making sure that the growers are using good agricultural practices in the field, just to make sure that they're treating what they're growing as a food product rather than just as a commodity.
Yeah. And does Mumm's, like, I know you're selling to home growers, you're selling to commercial growers. Do you also sell to other smaller seed companies to repack, or do you just do consumer sales?
Yeah, no, we do supply other seed companies, quite a few, and then we do some private label as well.
Right.
What about beyond pathogen testing? Are there other areas that somebody should really look at when they're purchasing seed for microgreens? I mean, do you see or hear of other retailers maybe cutting corners? What I'm getting at is, I mean, are all seed suppliers equal when it comes down to it, or are there really things that you should find out because having familiarity with the industry, like you've seen the bad? And maybe there's not anything there. Maybe there's no, if there's no answer, there's no answer.
My network is probably smaller than it could be. So we have good relationships with a lot of the other big Sprout and Microgreen seed companies we have relationships with. We have relationships with quite a few garden seed companies, and to my knowledge, they're all working really hard to do their best to provide high quality, safe seed. So I'm not aware of any red flags, but I also really don't have my finger on the pulse of any maybe of the new seed companies, and there could be ones that I'm not aware of. And then on the quality side, obviously just doing your own testing. We do offer free samples to our customers of any lots that they want to test in their own facilities. So, and I think lots of seed companies will do that. And even if they charge a small fee, it's still probably a good idea, because then you can really get a sense of whether the quality that they're offering is going to work well in your production system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we've talked about that, Diego. I know whenever we, with sunflower in particular for us, so there's always so much variability between lots, and it's like, send us a 10-kilogram bag, we're going to do some trials. Because sometimes, it could be a great lot for some growers, but for us, it just it just didn't work. And that's been a key thing for the food peddlers, to really have that in-house verification of what's going to work for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you see do you anticipate or expect some changes in particular around microgreens in the coming years? One thing we talk a lot about in the podcast is we see a lot of excitement about people growing microgreens. They try it out and then it withers away. You know, like, do you see this as a continuing growing trend? Are we seeing sort of peak small scale microgreens? Where do you sort of sense where things are at with microgreens production in North America and around the world?
That's a really good question. So I feel like on the commercial side of things sometimes I feel like, oh, like microgreens are everywhere. There's nowhere else for them to go. But then other days I think like about the, wilted imported lettuce leaves that are just ubiquitous. I think we have so much room to grow this. I think that there's definitely potential to have some local microgreen production displace some of the imported, low quality produce that we see everywhere all the time. And so that's really exciting to think about. And I think that people are getting more and more engaged with wanting to, like, in terms of folks growing food at home, people are getting more engaged with wanting to start their own gardens and maybe learning how to can. And I think that growing microgreens fits really nicely into that whole trend. And then, obviously I'm in a very, very cold climate, so it's almost a necessity to have some fresh greens growing indoors if you want to have nice produce year round.
Yeah, we're not all in sunny Southern California. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right. What are your thoughts in terms of microgreens when it comes to sustainability of them? This is something I hear a lot of talked about out there. You come from the farming side. I mean, here you are, you have 250 acres available to farm, not even enough to do anything in the business. Then you work with a network of 100 farmers, so there's thousands and thousands and thousands of acres dedicated to growing seeds to microgreens, which one could argue aren't really sustenance type crops. And we're using all this land to grow that. Some people have a problem with that when it comes to sustainability. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I guess a couple of different perspectives there. One, I feel because microgreens are so incredibly nutrient dense, that they do offer a really good value in terms of the inputs in the land required to produce seed. Secondly, they're very, very low waste. When we're looking at organic agriculture taking up 2% of cropland, and then those acres is just a very, very, very small percentage of that 2% that's being used to grow seed for sprouts and microgreens. In my mind, it's one of the few foods that's being grown on a field scale that's going to result in a truly nutrient dense, nutritious end product for the consumer. So I'm really proud whenever we see farmers growing seed for microgreens, because I feel like it's a really good end result that we're getting from those acres.
It's a really interesting perspective. And I think a lot of those farmers are also in a role where they can pivot, and they could go from growing radish seed to growing radish, to going from beet seed to growing beet. So there's a lot of options there as well, that if you needed more calories, that could still be done from that land.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then there's also the piece where a lot of the seeds that we sell are really important in a rotation. Like a lot of farmers don't have diverse enough rotations. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for their soil. And so if we can diversify rotations, and if we can have things like alfalfa, so that's why my parents first got into alfalfa seed production, was because it was really, really good for we're on sandy loam soil. So it was almost a necessity to have. They have many, many years of alfalfa in their 10-year rotation. The speckled peas are another really good example of that. Very good nitrogen fixing crop, great for farmers to have in their rotation. And now as a bonus, they have a market for that seed that they might not otherwise have if microgreen producers didn't hadn't developed this market for pea shoots. So it's like, it's a very good, in my mind, closed loop circle. And it really helps farmers to have a good rotation. And this market's an important one for that.
When you're growing a crop for seed on such a large scale, I mean, you're taking a relatively small part of the plant and then exporting that off. That's the seed. Is there other markets for all the leftover biomass, the rest of the sunflower, the rest of the pea? What's being done with that, out of personal curiosity?
The very best market at feeding our microbes in our soil.
Right. Okay.
So we tend to, it tends to go right back into the soil, and then it's that is a really important carbon input, and is important for the soil health. Just as an aside, Dad and I had a volunteer crop of radish one year. It didn't grow. Our daikon radish didn't set seed the way it should, because it was a volunteer crop and because of the weather that year. And so we ended up harvesting a lot of daikon radishes from the field. And that same year, we also harvested like a truckload of broccoli rab greens, not to market, but we had really nice greens all winter that we blanched and froze. So just on a personal level, you can have, sometimes have some fun if crops don't necessarily seed crops don't pan out the way that you anticipate. But typically, the rest of the plant is worked back into the soil.
Got it.
One of the questions I have here, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, Diego and I, what is the most challenging seed that you deal with in terms of all the seed that's being grown or you're importing? What's the one you have the most challenges with for whatever reason?
Sunflower. Yeah.
and what are the big, I know my perspective on sunflower. I love it as a crop, but I do find challenges in the seed. What are the challenges for you as a supplier in getting that seed reliably to the customers?
Well, agronomically, it's a challenging seed to grow on a field scale. In our climate, like we do have some varieties that are developed for the prairies, but even then we have farmers that have grown for us and they're harvesting, in 4 feet of snow just before Christmas. So,
wow.
And then, and in some of those cases, then the quality isn't meeting our standards. And so that's not fun for anyone. But we're working with more and more farmers on the prairies to grow organic sunflower. So on the production side, it's a challenge. And then it's probably one of the seed types that we reject the most in terms of our pre-purchase testing, because we need to grow it so many different ways to make sure that it's going to grow for the most of our customers. And even the very, very best lots that we've ever carried, we've always had some commercial growers who haven't liked them. So we've never had like a universal sunflower lot where every single grower has said, this is beautiful. So that's challenging to troubleshoot, and probably challenging for them too, because they hear us saying, oh, it grows really well for everybody else. Why isn't it working for you? Like, that's not a nice thing to hear, because they are having real challenges. So we are going through a huge volume of sunflowers. So just keeping up supply and the quality that we need is an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, and I was curious as well, like where does sunflower sit in terms of the importance or volume of seed that Mumm's is dealing with?
Yeah, it's one of our top sellers right now.
Yeah.
That was actually a question Chris and I had yesterday. In terms of sales per dollar, like total sales dollars, what are the top 2 crops?
I should know what the I want. I know by volume.
Or
so by volume,
sure.
by volume, it would be sunflower and speckled peas and wheat for wheatgrass. Those would be the 3 by volume.
That was my call. I think I said sunflower and wheatgrass yesterday. Is that right, Diego?
I think so.
And by dollar, I know broccoli would be in the up there. Alfalfa historically has been up there as well, but I haven't looked at those numbers lately, so I don't know.
I know you're trying to source a lot of seeds there locally in Saskatchewan, but I think Chris has mentioned before he's gotten some sunflower seeds from you guys that I think came from Italy and other places. Do you notice geographical characteristics with the seeds? Like, are seeds in certain locations just grown better or different when they grow as microgreens? Like, if you stayed in Saskatchewan because it's local, or because those farmers know how to grow good microgreen seed, and if Italy was right next door, those farmers, just given that climate, could grow a better seed, but you don't want to be trucking it across or freighting it across the Atlantic.
Well, sourcing locally is you know, it's one of our big values as a company. So we always, you know, always will try to source locally whenever possible, but then balancing that off with the quality expectations, as you mentioned. Right now with sunflowers in particular, like, you will see product of Canada, product of the US, and product of Italy, because we're needing to source from all three countries just to keep up with supply. But yeah, all else being equal, obviously we would choose to source from Saskatchewan. We have a lot of really good organic farmers here on the prairies who are growing really high quality seed crops. So we're really lucky that way. But it just gets a bit more challenging when we're looking at some of the specialty seed crops.
Do you notice a difference though, say in the Italian seeds? Like, I get you're trying to buy local, but you know, if you threw that mandate out the window and it was local, is there a difference between those seed characteristics when they're grown out and the ones grown in Saskatchewan?
Our rejection rate of samples is about equal across, for sunflowers anyhow, across the three countries. And so we have some customers who say, I really only want the US sunflowers, or I really only want the Italian sunflowers. And that's their experience. And those have been the lots that work well for them. But for us, we have we have challenges finding the seed that we need, regardless of what country we're sourcing from. And we don't see any trends, particularly with sunflowers from any one country.
Okay.
Yeah, when we were talking about this yesterday, I recall those three distinct countries of origin for the sunflower, and I could never tell if it was psychosomatic that the Canadian seed always seemed to grow best for us. But I always noticed with the Italian seed, I always thought it was the most variable in size. So there'd be some bigger and smaller seed. So over the years, it was like you could open up a lot of seed and almost get a sense of it sometimes before seeing the country of origin. But yeah, I think the lots would grow differently as well. So in terms of growing characteristics, definitely it's hard to pin that down.
Yeah.
I wonder, we've been here about an hour, so we should probably let you go soon. What are some, I just wonder, what are the things that, like, we're doing this interview partially because we're kind of seed and microgreens geeks, and it's super interesting, but we also want to make sure that commercial microgreens growers of all scales are well informed. And I actually see a lot of misinformation out there about seed. And as someone who works with seed in the microgreens realm and the vegetable realm and work with the Organic Seed Alliance, that's a bit disconcerting to me. Are there some key things that you think all growers need to know about seed when they're for purchasing? Like, what's the stuff that you as a supplier really want microgreens growers to know about seed?
It's a really good question. I'd have to say, probably first and foremost, use your ability to test samples, regardless from which seed supplier you're sourcing from, because that's a really important tool. It can save you a lot of time and headache, rather than getting a seed lot that doesn't work well for you. More in general, in terms of seeds and supply, I think the two, we've talked about this already, but the two biggest challenges we face, and I think many organic suppliers face, is climate change. Like, that's such a big challenge for farmers right now across the world, and that's not going away. So that will always be there. And then just needing more farmers to transition to organics, and having the you know, the knowledge and tools that they need to grow successful crops and be successful as organic producers is really important. So we're lucky in Canada to have a lot of different organizations working on that front right now, but that's really key to seed supply and so many other, you know, parts of the organic sector as well. But specifically for getting the seeds that we need, we do need more organic farmers.
And Diego, do you have anything else to add as well?
Yeah, just a little bit for people listening. Can you talk a little bit about Mumm's, the company? Do you just service commercial growers? Do you service the average home grower, shipping to US and Canada? I get a lot of questions about where to get seed from, and people want to know. So can you just talk about, you know, yeah, we service everybody, we'll ship to the US and Canada, that type of thing?
Yep. Yeah, we have most of our sales are in Canada, but about 25% are into the US. So we ship, you know, it doesn't, 60 or more small scale orders into the US a day, and then, you know, at least a handful of commercial orders into the US a day as well. So we have a lot of experience getting seed across the border. We do a lot of work on that front to make sure that shipments clear and there aren't issues. Yeah, so we do serve both commercial growers and home sprouters and microgreen growers. And so you can find small retail packages of our seed in independent natural food stores across Canada and in the US. And we also do ship our seed globally, but it's, you know, we don't market ourselves internationally. It's just by request only, but we ship to, you know, dozens and dozens of countries around the world very sporadically.
And for people in the US like myself, if I'm getting it from Canada, one thing that always comes up is how does it go when it hits the border? You know, duty, that type of thing. What's it look like? I'm in the US, I place an order, goes in. About how long till I get it in today's climate? And am I looking at any fees when it hits the border?
No, there won't be any fees when it hits the border. So we have decades of experience shipping seed across the border. So it's usually pretty seamless. Right now, our lead times are still a little bit longer than they normally are. So right now, if you placed an order, you'd probably be looking at about a week before it left our facility, and then probably 2 weeks in transit. And that would be whether you were having a smaller order that was shipped by courier, or if it was a large order that was shipped like LTL with a freight company on pallets. Probably similar transit times. The only real delays that we've seen at the border are occasionally with our smaller home sprouter orders. We've just lately through COVID, we've seen a few delays, but typically they seem to cross quite quickly. And yes, certainly no fees, no hidden duty fees or anything.
All right.
Yeah.
That's all I got, Chris.
Yeah, me as well. I think we covered a lot of great stuff there, and I think it's really just great to have insight into not just what it looks like from the grower end, but to better understand what it looks like on the supplier end, and that working with all the farmers, that was very insightful.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to chat today, Lisa.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Chris and Diego. I really appreciate it.